Welcome to the Dream Novel channel. Before starting to listen to the fun in this clip, don't forget to like and comment, so that the admin will have the encouragement to continue making clips. Let's go listen. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 246, The Blue Crystal Shard. In Nicholas's private library, Kyle sat at the table as usual, quietly leafing through a book on alchemy. Tada, the house elf, stood nearby, and as Kyle finished reading the last page, she handed him a glass of freshly made lemonade. "Thanks," Kyle said, finishing the drink with a satisfied sigh. It had been a month since his arrival, and in that time, he had practically lived in this library. Sometimes Tada even brought him his meals. Though Nicholas Flamel hadn't personally taught him any alchemy, he had recommended numerous books ideal for beginners. This guidance alone had led to a marked improvement in Kyle's understanding of alchemy, and he could feel his skills advancing significantly. The progress he'd made left him deeply content. But, unfortunately, today was his last day here. Kyle reluctantly handed the book he was reading to Tada and left the library alone. In the lobby, he found Nicholas Flamel still enjoying an opera performance from his memories. As Kyle approached, the orchestra in Nicholas's mind seemed to finish the last note. "I was just wondering when you'd come out," Nicholas remarked, putting away his memories and slowly rising from the beach chair. "Perenelle has already called for us several times. It's time to head back." Perenelle, Nicholas's wife, had stayed behind in Devon to tend to the garden and hadn't joined them on this trip to Paris. "Are we leaving now?" Kyle asked. "No rush," Nicholas replied with a smile. "First, I need to see if you've been keeping up with your studies." "All right then. Professor Nicholas." Kyle took a folded piece of parchment from his pocket and unfolded it in front of Nicholas. The parchment displayed a map of the entire estate, with every room labeled, and in the center of the hall, Kyle's name was clearly marked. "A map?" Nicholas asked with interest. "Yes," Kyle said. "The original map was drawn by Tada. I studied the tracing magic behind the summoning charm, along with a few other techniques, to produce this." He pulled out his wand and tapped it on the map, softly saying, "Library." Instantly, a clear dotted line appeared, connecting Kyle's name in the hall to the library on the parchment. Nicholas's eyes gleamed for a moment. Without a word, he flicked his fingers, and the hall around them seemed to come alive. The corridor behind Kyle began to shift, gradually sealing itself off until it had become a solid wall. Doors and windows throughout the hall slowly faded, until the room was completely enclosed, with no visible exits. Nicholas looked back at the parchment. The layout of the rooms had changed, but, curiously, the dotted line connecting Kyle to the library was still present, only now, it pointed in a different direction. The line bent towards the newly formed wall on the left, where it vanished into the solid surface. "It seems your work has failed," Nicholas remarked, looking up at Kyle with a smile. He pointed toward the wall where the dotted line ended. "There's no exit there." "Not necessarily, Nicholas," Kyle replied, smiling back. He walked confidently toward the wall, took a deep breath, and then dashed forward, crashing straight into it. Just like platform 9 3/4, Kyle passed through the wall effortlessly, emerging into the familiar corridor beyond. Nicholas followed him with an approving look. "Allow me to retract my previous comment," he said with a chuckle. "It's excellent work, you really haven't slacked off." He paused, then asked, "Shall we head back now?" "Of course." Nicholas pulled out 2 crystal shards, one blue and one red. "These are the keys. Channel magic into them using alchemy, and they'll open the way." Kyle stared at the blue crystal, which was identical to a shard of the Philosopher's Stone. He opened his mouth, about to ask a question, but decided against it. Nicholas continued, "The red one will send you home. The blue one will allow you to return to this library if you ever need to." "Back here again?" Kyle asked, glancing up instinctively. "Yes," Nicholas replied. "I imagine you've been wondering why I invited you here." Kyle nodded after a brief silence. Initially, He'd thought it was connected to the Order of Merlin Metal. But if that were the case, he wouldn't have been invited to stay so long. He recalled that 10 days ago, during a meal, Perenelle had urged Nicholas to return home. Kyle had been ready to leave then, but Nicholas had insisted on staying to watch an opera, a plan that had kept them confined to the house for days. "It's because I saw you coming here, about 2 months ago," Nicholas said. 2 months ago? Kyle thought back. Hogwarts hadn't even gone on break yet. "Was it a prophecy?" he asked cautiously. "Not exactly," Nicholas replied, winking. "But you could think of it that way. Do you want to know what I saw?" "No." Kyle shook his head at once. Prophecies in the wizarding world were tricky. If you didn't know about them, there was a chance to avoid their outcome. But once you were aware, it was said they would inevitably come to pass. "Don't be so tense." Nicholas waved his hand, restoring the room to its original state. "All I saw was you coming here twice. That was it. But there was this strong feeling, a voice, even, that insisted you needed this knowledge, and that I should help you." Kyle's face softened. As long as it didn't involve Nicholas himself, he doubted it was anything too severe. After all, the last time Nicholas had lent a hand, it had been to, oh, right, save Paris. They returned together to the lobby, where Nicholas gestured to a small box on a table nearby. "Just one last thing. A bit late, but happy birthday, kid." Kyle's eyes widened, realizing that it was August 5th, and he'd completely forgotten his birthday had been 5 days ago. "Thank you, Nicholas." "What is it? Didn't you mention you needed a box for storing magical items?" Nicholas said. "I put this together for you while I was listening to the opera." Kyle picked up the box, inspecting it with fascination. It had a dark gold finish, and along the opening were golden symbols he recognized as preservation runes. "This is perfect," Kyle said, grinning. "I'm glad you like it." Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 247, The Journey Back and Different Gifts. It was already evening when Kyle returned to St. Catchpole Village. After completing his journey with the door key and dropping down from mid-air, he was greeted by a group waiting for him. Chris, who seemed to know in advance that Kyle would be back, was standing by the door. "Dumbledore wrote to let us know you'd be coming home today," Chris said with a smile. "But I didn't expect it to be this late. I was supposed to be here in the afternoon, but something came up and delayed me." "That's all right. You're just in time for dinner," Chris replied, opening the door for him. Kyle had barely stepped inside and hadn't even had a chance to grab a drink before Chris eagerly asked, "So, tell me, what's Nicholas Flamel like?" "I imagine, he must be a serious and disciplined scholar." More or less," Kyle replied, though his expression turned a little wry. "Discipline? Hard to say." Throughout his stay, Nicholas had donned horn-rimmed glasses, colorful floral shirts, and loose shorts, typically lounging back in a chair listening to opera. In his own way, that was a sort of discipline. "Dad, haven't you ever met Nicholas before?" Kyle asked. "No," Chris shook his head, adding with a playful smile, "I'm not like you, receiving the Order of Merlin at 12. As he inquired further, Kyle offered only vague answers, wanting to preserve Nicholas's mystique, then made an excuse about putting away his luggage and hurried upstairs. His room was filled with neatly wrapped birthday gifts, all of which had arrived days earlier. Since Kyle had been staying with Nicholas, the owls delivering them hadn't been able to find him, so they'd ended up here instead. But now was not the time to start unwrapping them. Just then, Ratton flew in through the open window, and the voices of Fred and George echoed up from outside. "Kyle, are you back? Come on out. We've got someone with us." Kyle leaned out of his window and spotted a small figure standing behind them. "Potter?" "That's right," said Fred with a grin. "We freed him from his cage. In Dad's flying car. It was incredible, but too bad you missed it." Behind them, Harry waved cheerfully up at Kyle. Ron had been right, his family was certainly close to Kyle. And while his home wasn't quite as peculiar as the Burrow, it still had its own charm. Soon, with Kyle's invitation, Harry followed Fred and George into the house. The large living room was even more spacious than the Dursleys'. But before Harry could properly take it in, he saw Fred and George already dashing up the stairs, leaving him to follow in their wake. As soon as they reached the upstairs floor, Fred and George barged into Kyle's room, theatrically scolding him. "Kyle, you said you'd only be gone a few days. But it's been a whole month. Do you have any idea what we've been through? Playing Quidditch in the common room, annoying Percy, and pranking Ron." Kyle replied calmly, "Or were you hiding away in your room to work on the skiving snack box? I'm sure Mrs. Weasley doesn't know you've stashed it under your bed." Fred and George exchanged a quick glance before grinning. "Ha, Kyle, you're mistaken. We actually hid it under Ron's bed." Beside Harry, Ron's eyes widened in disbelief. His cheeks flushed as he spluttered, "You never told me." No wonder Fred and George had been sneaking into his room recently and even letting him borrow their broom. It had all been a cover. Ron thought they were just being nice, but now he realized it was just a scheme. "Come on, Ron, it was only temporary," Fred said with a laugh. Ron's face turned stormy. "No way. What if Mom finds out? Take it out of there now. If you insist." George sighed dramatically. "You're our little brother, and you won't even help us with this tiny favor." "It's heartbreaking, really." Fred nodded solemnly. "We were even planning to get you a present when school starts, but now, well, forget it." "Fine, fine." Ron's face grew redder as he mumbled something under his breath, almost as if he wanted to retract his words, but before he could, Fred and George had already dashed off, cackling as they left the room. While the twins raced off, Harry's gaze drifted over the neatly wrapped gifts piled in Kyle's room. He noticed several of the packages marked with "Happy Birthday" labels and froze, looking over at Ron. "Ron, you should have told me it was Kyle's birthday today. I didn't have time to get him anything." "Oh, no," Ron shook his head, snapping out of his embarrassment. "Actually, Kyle's birthday was a few days ago, July 31st. July 31st. Wait, that's yeah, Kyle and you have the same birthday," Ron said, frowning. "Didn't I tell you before?" "Never." Harry muttered, though he had a vague sense he'd heard it somewhere. "Oh. I remember, it was Hagrid," Harry said, clapping his hands together. "When he first took me to Diagon Alley, he mentioned that him and I share a birthday." "What are you two whispering about?" Kyle asked, noticing them. "Nothing," Harry replied quickly. "But Kyle, you weren't home before. How did your presents get here? Did house elves intercept them or something?" "House elves?" "Not quite," Kyle replied with a chuckle. "It's just that where I was staying was a little hard for the owls to locate, that's all." But speaking of presents, Kyle pulled out 2 small boxes from his pocket and tossed them to Harry and Ron. "Here, these are for you. I made them myself." Harry and Ron caught the boxes eagerly. Harry's box held a badge. "It's waterproof and moisture resistant," Kyle explained. "You can wear it in the rain during Quidditch without any problems." He'd originally planned it for Fred and George, but it would work just as well for Harry, and making another one wouldn't be hard. "Thanks, this is amazing." Harry pinned the badge on at once, already planning to buy Kyle a gift the next time he went to Diagon Alley. Ron's box contained a special quill pen that Kyle had designed just for him, one that automatically replenished its ink. It would make homework much faster and free up more time for fun. Yet, for some reason, Ron didn't look quite as thrilled about it. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 248, Lovegood. Kyle had been invited to Nicholas Flamel's home as a guest, a detail meant to stay confidential. But, as Dumbledore had once told Harry, secrets had a knack for escaping into the open. By the time Kyle returned, it seemed everyone knew. At dinner, Mr. Weasley, much like Chris had done earlier, kept asking Kyle about Nicholas Flamel and whether he'd encountered any talking refrigerators or enchanted Muggle gadgets. "Dad worships Nicholas Flamel," Fred whispered conspiratorially. "He's been practically vibrating with excitement ever since he accidentally ran into Headmaster Dumbledore and found out where you'd gone." George added with a grin, "I think he's convinced Flamel's house is full of talking Muggle appliances." In the end, with Mr. Weasley's eager gaze fixed on him, Kyle had to gently break it to him that Nicholas's house did not have a talking refrigerator, nor did the lawnmower tell jokes while tap dancing. In fact, none of the magical Muggle appliances Mr. Weasley imagined could be found there. This news left Mr. Weasley visibly deflated. But Kyle really couldn't do much to cheer him up. Nicholas's estate in Paris was where he had lived for centuries, long before even the invention of light bulbs. Even the beach chair on which Nicholas sat listening to his opera recordings had been brought over from Devon and was simply an old favorite. Though disappointed, Mr. Weasley perked up with a new idea. He decided to buy a similar beach chair and enchanted himself to feel closer to his alchemical hero. Mrs. Weasley, however, did not share his enthusiasm. With the flying car incident still fresh in her mind, she was hardly thrilled about the prospect of another experimental Muggle object in the house. Her sharp, disapproving gaze was enough to signal that Mr. Weasley would likely face an earful once dinner was over. The others were curious about Kyle's recent experiences, but when Fred, George, and Ron learned he'd spent the entire month reading, their interest evaporated. In their view, summer was for fun, and dedicating it to books seemed like a scandalous waste of time. Percy asked a few questions, but he didn't seem particularly engaged either. With no alchemy on the Hogwarts exams, he saw no reason to bother with extra studies. Harry, however, was stunned, his mouth slightly agape ever since Mr. Weasley had brought up the topic. He'd known that Kyle was a guest somewhere, but he never imagined it was with the Nicholas Flamel, a wizard over 600 years old and creator of the Philosopher's Stone. While he was busy worrying about his homework, Kyle had been visiting a Legends home. It made Harry feel that sometimes, the gap between wizards was wider than that between wizards and gnomes. After dinner, Mr. Weasley was indeed pulled aside by Mrs. Weasley, while Fred and George, feeling overstuffed from the meal, invited Kyle and Harry to join them in a traditional activity of St. Catchpole Village, a round of gnome tossing in the garden. "The rules are simple, Harry," Fred explained as they reached the garden. He grabbed a gnome, a creature resembling a potato with limbs, from the flower bed. "You just need to throw it or use a bat to send it flying as far as possible. Like this." With a swift swing, Fred whacked the gnome with a short bat, sending it soaring through the evening sky. At Harry's surprised expression, George clarified, "Gnomes have tough skin, so a wooden bat barely bothers them. Sometimes I think they'd make decent bludgers." Harry, hesitant at first, soon found himself bitten by a particularly feisty gnome and quickly morphed into a dedicated batting machine. "Oh, that last one was at least 200 feet, Harry," said Fred, watching the flight of the gnome. "More like 250, said George, nodding. Since it was late, they didn't bother with strict measurements and simply estimated distances as they went along. "I think I had the angle off on that last one. I bet I can hit it farther this time," Harry said, grabbing another gnome, which had been watching the fun, and swung again. "Nice one, Harry," George said with approval. "That was a textbook straight fly. You've got a knack for beater skills, Al." A painful yelp echoed from somewhere in the distance. The group exchanged alarmed glances and rushed towards the sound. When they reached the spot, they saw a figure crouched down, clutching his head. "I'm really sorry, sir," Harry stammered. "I didn't know anyone was there." The man looked up, a little dazed, and smiled weakly. "No worries, it's my own fault for not paying attention." But then he noticed the group and froze, a faint smile dawning on his face. "Ah, Fred, George, Kyle, good, you're not throwing garden gnome again this time, right?" It was then that they all recognized him, a man with slightly crossed eyes, fluffy white hair like cotton candy spilling down to his shoulders, dressed in a bright yellow robe. A gold chain hung around his neck with a pendant resembling a triangular eye. Mr. Lovegood?" Kyle asked, a little surprised. The unfortunate man hit by the gnome was Xenophilius Lovegood, who lived just north of St. Catchpole village. "Just back from a trip?" Kyle asked. "Yes," replied Lovegood, rubbing his head with a chuckle. "I was so caught up with Luna, searching for Crumplehorn Snorkax, I lost track of time." Just then, a little girl dashed up to them from the distance. She had long, messy blonde hair, wore carrot-shaped earrings and a necklace made from butterbeer bottle caps, and was clutching half a leaf she'd picked up somewhere. Her whimsical look made her seem almost otherworldly. "Dad, I found something interesting." "Oh. Kyle, it's been ages," Luna Lovegood said, bouncing over to him. Tilting her head, she fixed her slightly protuberant silver eyes on him. "Long time no see, Luna," Kyle replied warmly. "Have you been hunting for Raxperts?" "I've never seen Raxperts on you, and I don't see any now, either," Luna said, her voice lilting like a song. She then pointed at Harry. "But he's got loads of them, right there, buzzing around his ears." Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 249, The Eccentric Girl. Luna Harry, thinking Raxperts might be some sort of insect, instinctively scratched at his ear, but didn't feel anything even after he'd rubbed it red. He wanted to ask what a Raxpert actually was, but before he could, Luna had already skipped back over to her father. She studied the bump on Mr. Lovegood's head with fascination and reached out to touch it. "Ouch!" Mr. Lovegood winced, his face scrunching in pain. "Sorry, Dad," Luna said quickly, though she couldn't resist poking it again. "Did the Crumplehorn Snorkack do this? Did you actually see it?" At this, Mr. Lovegood's pain seemed to evaporate. Standing up, he brushed off his vibrant yellow robe and said, "No, Luna, I didn't actually see the Crumplehorn Snorkack. But I believe it knew we were looking for it and left us this little reminder." "You're amazing, Dad," Luna said, twirling with a delighted smile. Harry, listening to this, grew more confused by the minute. He couldn't shake the thought that maybe the bump on Mr. Lovegood's head wasn't caused by the gnome after all. He glanced around and saw the gnome he had hit earlier, muttering and stomping off nearby. But if the gnome hadn't caused the bump, why had Mr. Lovegood mentioned a what? And what was a Crumplehorn Snorkack, anyway? Harry scratched his head, feeling utterly out of his depth. By the looks on their faces, Ron and the others seemed just as puzzled. Only Kyle seemed unfazed and curious as he asked, "Mr. Lovegood, did you manage to find a Crumplehorn Snorkack this time?" "We were very close," Mr. Lovegood said with a hint of regret. "We found signs of it in the southern valley, but it must have moved on before we got there. And I found this." Luna chimed in, proudly holding up a half-nibbled leaf. "It's leftover from the Crumplehorn Snorkack. Dad, it must have left this behind when it passed through." "Exactly, Luna." Mr. Lovegood sighed with a touch of wistfulness. "If only we hadn't left the area." "Can I see that leaf?" Kyle asked, intrigued. "Of course." Luna handed it to him eagerly. "Are you interested in the Crumplehorn Snorkack too?" "Well, I'm interested in all magical creatures." Kyle took the leaf and examined it carefully in the moonlight, but his expression quickly turned dubious. The bite marks looked very familiar. If the Lovegoods could swing by the Burrows' garden, they might find plenty of what they were looking for. This clue was clearly a potato sprout, nibbled by none other than a garden gnome. There were loads of them out front, and if they wanted, they could collect a whole pile. Just then, Luna's voice brought him back. "Kyle, stay still, there's a blibbering humdinger right next to your nose." "Oh, it's gone now." "What?" Kyle blinked, handing the potato sprout back to her. "What exactly is a blibbering humdinger?" "It's a type of house elf," Luna explained serenely. "They dance around intelligent people to confuse them, so they forget what they were going to say. They're very rare." "Did you see it, Dad?" she asked. Mr. Lovegood looked disappointed. "I must have missed it while tidying up," he replied with a shake of his head. Kyle shrugged it off. The Lovegoods often talked about creatures no one else seemed to know about. Even Newt Scamander would probably need a detailed manual to decipher their conversations. Mr. Lovegood. Kyle changed the subject. Luna's starting at Hogwarts this year, right? Yes, her acceptance letter arrived 3 days ago, Mr. Lovegood replied happily. Such a joyous occasion. I've been gathering materials to make her a special gift, a pair of magical glasses. They'll help me see Raxperts, Luna added dreamily. Kyle managed a polite smile, though he couldn't help but feel wary. He didn't exactly want to be caught wearing any of the Lovegoods' inventions. It might make him look, well, a bit too eccentric. The three chatted for a while longer before Mr. Lovegood and Luna hurried off. As they walked back to the burrow, Harry couldn't hold back his curiosity. Ron, who were those two? The Lovegoods, Ron replied. They live in the house with the big chimney on the north side, with a wooden windmill out front. Oh, and Mr. Lovegood's the editor of the Quibbler. The Quibbler? Harry repeated, intrigued. A really weird magazine, Ron explained. Almost everything in it is nonsense, so hardly anyone takes it seriously. Oh, Harry nodded, amused. And that, what did she call it? Raxpert? And Crumplehorn Snorkack? Are those supposed to be magical creatures? I've never heard of them. Nothing you need to worry about, Ron said dismissively, waving his hand. Everyone calls her Loony Lovegood. She's got a wild imagination, just like the magazine. Loony? Yeah, everyone who knows her calls her that, Ron shrugged. She's as into nonsense as the Quibbler itself. Not many people want to be around the Lovegoods, honestly. Only Kyle manages to hold a conversation with them. But I bet even he doesn't understand half of what they say. Harry thought back to Luna's dreamy demeanor and couldn't help but feel the nickname fit her, though he found her strangely fascinating. What a peculiar family, he muttered. Have they always been like this? They used to be different. We even had dinner with them a few times. But since 2 years ago. Ron suddenly glanced around, then lowered his voice. They've been like that ever since an explosion 2 years back. Mom invited them over loads of times afterward, but they always refuse. Explosion? Harry asked, intrigued. It was supposed to be a magical experiment gone wrong, Ron sighed, whispering. I even remember Kyle warning them to be careful with magic experiments. Ron. Ginny appeared, scowling as she approached them. Did you forget? Mom told us not to mention that to anyone. I didn't forget. Ron defended himself. But this is Harry. He's not just anyone. Normally, at the mention of Harry's name, Ginny would go bright red and hurry off, but this time she stood her ground, frowning at Ron. Fine, fine. I won't tell anyone. Ron muttered, looking away. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 250, Course Selection. A week after returning from Paris, Kyle finally received a Hogwarts letter on a bright morning. Heading downstairs for breakfast, he found Fred and George waiting in the living room, looking restless and eager. After hiding out for over a month, they now spent nearly every day in Kyle's attic, happily working on their skiving snack box experiments. Chris, surprisingly, didn't mind their racket. In fact, he welcomed it, calling it early morning excitement. A letter from school. Kyle picked up the yellow parchment envelope with its distinctive green writing. Yeah, it just arrived, Chris said. 5 minutes ago, Fred added. We caught sight of the owl on its way out. George chimed in, grinning. Kyle read it. You'll be in for a surprise. Kyle opened the letter and read it carefully. As usual, it informed him to board the Hogwarts Express at King's Cross Station on September 1st and included a list of required books for the upcoming school year. For third years, the list read, Intermediate Transfiguration by Emmerich switched the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 3 by Miranda Goshawk Break with a Banshee by Gilderoy Lockhart Gaddying with Ghouls by Gilderoy Lockhart Holidays with Hags by Gilderoy Lockhart, and 7 more books in the same series, all by Gilderoy Lockhart. Though Kyle had expected it, he couldn't help but rub his forehead at the sight of this extravagant book list. Lockhart's books weren't cheap, averaging around 5 galleons each. With 7 required books, the total came to 35 galleons, a substantial sum, nearly half of what Mr. Weasley earned in 2 weeks. For Hogwarts families across the board, even if only half of the students purchased the books, Lockhart stood to make tens of thousands of galleons. The Potter family's hard-earned wealth over several generations wouldn't add up to what Lockhart would pocket in a single year. No wonder he'd taken the defense against the dark arts job, professor's curse or not. Who could resist the allure of such easy profit? After skimming the book list, Kyle pulled out a second piece of parchment from the envelope. "Hey, why do you have an extra one?" Fred asked, momentarily puzzled. Then he realized, oh, right, you're in 3rd year now. You get to choose your classes. Kyle looked at the parchment listing his options. 3rd year elective: select at least 2 courses and purchase the required textbooks before term starts. Arithmancy, Numerology and Grammatica by L. Wakefield and M. Carnero. Divination, Unfogging the Future by Cassandra Vablitsky. Care of Magical Creatures, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them by Newt Scamander. Muggle Studies, Home Life and Social Habits of British Muggles by Wilhelm Wigworthy. Ancient Runes Made Easy. Rune Dictionary. Runes explained in detail. Magical Hieroglyphs and Logograms. Spellman Syllabaric. Kyle noted the 5 books listed for Ancient Runes, which included dictionaries and syllabaries, a clear warning about the complexity of the course. When they saw Kyle's choice, Fred and George shivered in unison. "Seriously, this class is the worst disaster I've ever faced," Fred said, his voice tinged with lingering dread. "Even worse than that time we had lunch with the 3-headed dog." Kyle casually circled Ancient Runes on the form. "So, you two aren't taking this again this year?" "Nope. Just dropping divination," Fred said. "To focus on research for the future Weasley joke shop," George added, a little sadly. "So, what are you taking as your second subject?" Fred asked. "Care of Magical Creatures. Or divination?" "I'd recommend divination," George said seriously. "It's dead easy, and it's a breeze to get a high mark if you just, He suddenly remembered Chris was in the room and changed course, "if you just pay close attention in class." Chris chuckled knowingly. Though he hadn't encountered Sybil Trelawney himself, her reputation as the professor of frauds was widely discussed among younger ministry workers. When will Trelawney be fired was apparently a popular debate topic at the ministry, so he was well aware of the true nature of divination. But he simply continued eating his breakfast, letting the twins carry on. "Care of Magical Creatures is also a good choice," George added, eyeing Kyle. "Honestly, for you, it'd be even easier than divination." "That's true," Kyle agreed, marking a line next to Care of Magical Creatures as well. Then he glanced down at the remaining options: divination, arithmancy, and Muggle Studies, and, to Fred and George's astonishment, he marked all of them. "Kyle, you're not planning to take as many classes as Percy, are you?" George asked, eyebrows raised. "That's a terrible idea. You may not know this," Fred said, "but Percy nearly went mad in 3rd year. Slept at home for 3 straight days over Christmas holidays." George added, "and didn't wake up once the whole time. Mum was so scared she almost sent him to St. Mungo's," Fred finished. Even Chris, listening in, looked concerned. "I wouldn't recommend taking so many classes either, Kyle. You already have an Order of Merlin, 2nd class, no need to chase 12 OWLs," he glanced at his son. "Besides, those who try to cheat time often find time turns on them in the end. You understand what I mean?" "Of course, Dad," Kyle said, folding the course selection sheet with a smile. "Trust me, I can handle it." "If you're sure, all right." Chris nodded after a brief hesitation. Kyle called for Radden, who took the form in his claws and sped off toward Hogwarts, disappearing in a flash. Fred and George looked at each other in alarm. They'd meant to talk Kyle into choosing fewer classes. After all, they'd seen firsthand how Percy had been reduced to a pale, sleep-deprived wreck by third year. But Radden was already gone, leaving them no time to react. Seeing their efforts dashed, the twins exchanged resigned looks. They'd have to regroup and try another plan. They would write to their friends and rally them on the Hogwarts Express. One way or another, they were determined to talk Kyle out of his decision before classes started. Now the fun in this clip is over. Which listeners haven't liked and commented yet? You can press like and comment to encourage the admin find the fun in the next clip. May the listeners be happy forever.